So the session will be recorded. There'll be lots of stop going through for questions at the end of each of the sort of sessions as we go along the way. Today's agenda, let me just get moving everything along. So welcome, and as I was acknowledging everyone for the support, there's been enormous support for this program of work as we've been going through. So I really want to appreciate it. And in particular, this has been made possible from funding from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulators Heavy Vehicle Safety Initiative, which is supported by the federal government. So without them, we would not have been able to deliver this work whatsoever. So before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm recording this meeting from the lands of the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Burrung people of the Kulin Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all working today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting webinar. So as you can see, this is our agenda we're going to be moving through, and there'll be a number of presentations. Michael Holmes will be looking after the CLOCS standard finalisation and the auditing accreditation. I'll touch on the supporting tools, and then Drew Gaynor will be going through the governance and structure. And we'll also be just giving an update on the EOI process as part of agenda item 5, and then sort of closing up with acknowledgements and other business as well. So thank you all once again for taking the time to go in. Just a quick sort of recap as to why we're sort of here. This is really to acknowledge that as construction projects, traditionally a lot of the elements when they sort of took place, they're sort of standalone construction events that are sort of taking place in different sorts of cities and areas around the area, and sort of developed a sort of bit of an island approach. And we also recognise that there is a number of major projects which are beginning to move to the CLOCS project, and that's what's really helped inform us moving forward and adapting CLOCS from the UK and the major projects into the Australian context. So the key thing in this is looking at a national adaptation of it. So wherever you are in Australia, whichever state, we're looking at a consistent sort of standard. So it's not about creating new legislation, but providing a simple sort of baseline for all sort of projects that are moving forward. And key part of that is giving consistency and confidence for industry, that wherever you move from A to B, different sort of projects within the CLOCS program, there's not variabilities in that. So, and in designing and building it together, it's not just looking at the big end, but drawing on them and how we can apply it to medium and small projects and operators as well. And that's where we're really feeding in the community focus for it all. And the key thing from that is getting the different sort of groups to just, I guess, show empathy, see through each other's eyes, and be considerate of. It's not just the responsibility of transport or heavy vehicles, but community, everyone, government, contractors, consultants, transport sector, all working together. And as a result, if we can share the good practice, it works out as a win-win situation. And most importantly, what we've been doing is it's not about recreating the wheel, it's drawing on and adapting what already exists. And for a lot of you, you may be aware that the approach on road safety within Australia is the shared responsibility, and we all have a role to take, to play. And hopefully when the incident does take place, it doesn't result in a fatal or serious injury, because I guess the system's sort of absorbing the energy of any form of incident when it takes through. And this last one is just a key thing which was shared from me from a CEO of another sort of organisation. And they said, key thing now, especially within business and safety in those areas, is leading successful companies around the world are collaborating, and that's what's helping them get a sustained and broader competitive advantage than just working in isolation, which creates a win-win situation. And that was someone from the gig sector that we're working with that made that sort of point on another project. So the aims of CLOCS, just touching on this very quickly. These are the areas that, and that's what we're going to be going through today's sort of session, highlighting the best practice approach for construction. Aiming is really engaging the public community and really building their trust as we move sort of forward, and really looking at driving efficiency for the sector as well, which will help with productivity and environmental benefits as a side component as well. And that all flows through from the single and consistent contract requirements, and thereby allows industry to invest in these sort of vehicles and systems and everything that will allow them to deliver the CLOCS standard. And look, this is a bit of a summary which we've taken out some work over just in the CLOCS program where they did some evaluation, and that was the project was reviewed. So CLOCS was reviewed, I think it's like 5 or 6 years after being operating as well, and it's gone from strength to strength since then. But really going back to the heart of where this has sort of come from is look, you look at these coronial inquests. Unfortunately, any incident that involves a heavy vehicle just has to be at a load speed. But one of the key points of that coronial inquest with Rebecca Mayer as an example was it laid out what people for the truck driver can do, what the truck can do, but then what the community can do. And it really highlights it's not just, once again, the responsibility of one person. But it really goes back, shows, look, all this is around improving the safety on the road, reducing road trauma, and the broadening ripple effect that any of these sort of instances happen, which go through the companies, the organisations, families, police, enforcement, all those sort of areas as they sort of move forward. And this really goes to the heart as to why we're sort of here, and this is what the benefit and the goal of what we're doing and going through. The last one I'll sort of touch on before we begin diving into the core components of it. CLOCS A is now captured in the National Road Safety Strategy Action Plan, which was recently released a few months ago. Sorry, I think six weeks ago, I believe now. But it's also seeing a number of state plans as well along the East Coast, and it's inferred in the Victorian one as well. So South Australia was the latest one to release their state action plan, which was clearly captured in that as to how they're going to look at supporting the National Road Safety Strategy Action Plan as well. So you can sort of see the alignment flowing through all the different sort of states and strategies with regards to road safety, which is underpinning exactly what the goal of the CLOCS A program is, to have that consistency. So we're seeing government getting aligned, and now we're sort of seeing the foundations for the next sort of steps as we move forward. So that's really seeing the foundations of the program and the work to date, where it's sort of come from. Now we're going to dive into really showing this is some of the core sort of elements as we're going through. So this is the agenda item 2, which is now drawing on the CLOCS A standard finalisation. Over to you, Michael.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jerome. So in this section, I'm just going to provide an update to the CLOCS A community on the latest CLOCS A standard. So we are in the basically the back end of the development of the CLOCS A standard. Might go to the next slide. Sorry, Jerome, just so I can. Yep. So just to, I'm sure most people on the call have seen this slide in previous workshops. This just takes us back to our development timeline for the CLOCS A standard. Pretty much everyone on this call has been involved to some extent, whether as part of a technical group working on the requirements, reviewing requirements, or sharing practices from your existing organization or experience, etc., to help tailor what those requirements will be in the CLOCS A standard. That's been as Jerome spoke about just earlier, that's been a long journey. We've been working on this formally since February 2022, really through the establishment of those technical groups and refining what the requirements will be in the CLOCS A standard. So we are at the back end, as I mentioned. Right now, we do have a final draft of the CLOCS A standard, which has been basically updated following the consultation period after our national workshop in November last year. And our end goal for publication of the standard is basically after June 2023. So we are aiming for a publication date after this financial year. Our deliverable with the NHVR as well as part of this National Heavy Vehicle Regulator Heavy Vehicle Safety Initiative funding is to deliver that standard within this financial year. So that's what we're all aiming towards at the moment. So just go to the next slide. Thanks, Jerome. So just to take you through and cast your memory back to last year in November, we released the draft CLOCS A standard for feedback to the CLOCS A community in November last year, 25th of November. That was following our national consolidation workshop. A lot of you on the call will remember the technical group leads for each technical group presented the core requirements of the standard, which were part of that document that was issued. So the consultation was open to the CLOCS A industry network. That includes pretty much everyone on this call today. as well as a number of other organisations that we reached out to. But this reflects the stakeholders that are responsible champions for implementation of the standard going forward. So a range of government departments from different jurisdictions, infrastructure clients, principal contractors, transport companies, road safety groups, and fleet providers as well. Following the issue of the standard to our network, we have also approached a number of additional stakeholders, including the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, Master Builders, Construction Supply Chain Council, and Transport Workers Union, as well as a number of peak associations from industry and local governments. So we had a consultation period open for 8 weeks, and at the end of it got just over 120 comments back, received from our range of stakeholders listed there. In terms of the comments received back, they range from comments about the content in the standard, whether amendments should be made or additional support or tools should be developed to help guide implementers of the standard to comply with that particular specification or requirement. Ranging to other comments saying that they fully endorse the standard, etc. So there was obviously a wide range of feedback coming from the various stakeholders approached. Let's go to the next slide. Thanks, Jerome. I'm not sure if people can see that, but this table will be released with the final draft of the standard as well. But during the review period, just to take you through, obviously we received quite a lot of comments and feedback on the standard. Yeah, some of them basically were issued to respective technical groups, or those comments were managed by the consolidation working group if they didn't relate to a technical requirement. So the initial review of the comments basically involved filtering those into our review table, and were allocated to each technical group depending on the subject matter. Technical groups then formalized their positions on each comment and provided a response basically on the action to be taken. So whether that constituted an actual update to the CLOCS standard itself, or whether that was an item that just had to be noted and transferred to the future CLOCS host and managing body, which Jerome will talk more about that managing body later on in the presentation. The consolidation group then reviewed and identified what necessary updates were needed for the CLOCS standard, and then flagged any of those comments for future work. So that's all captured within our table for transfer to the future CLOCS host. Again, as I mentioned, there's a couple of examples there, as you can see, where an update is required to the standard, and the second one there being not within the scope of an update to the standard itself, but will need further work in terms of the CLOCS entity or host will have to provide those additional resources, whether on the website or in additional document. Next slide, thanks, Jerome. So yeah, regarding updates to the draft, yeah, basically amendments have been made where the comment was accepted by the technical group or consolidation group. Those amendments to the standard are made in track changes, and the updated CLOCS standard has been issued to the steering group. So that's in that final stage of endorsement at the moment. Following that, the final draft will be basically cleaned up and sanitized, and will be issued obviously to the CLOCS community. Where the comment didn't apply to, yeah, I mentioned this already. So if the comment didn't apply to the standard, it has been flagged for transfer to the CLOCS host. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Jerome. So just a summary of the major updates that were made to the draft CLOCS standard. These included, there was a requirement which was under the stakeholder requirements, principal contractors for drug and alcohol testing requirements. There was a clause which was for principal contractors to extend their drug and alcohol testing regime to transport subcontractors. Following consultation, this requirement has been amended, and this will no longer, the requirement will no longer extend to transport subcontractors. So the onus will not be on principal contractors to require transport subcontractors to participate in their testing regime. However, this has been updated to more of an assurance requirement. So principal contractors will still have to have assurance that within their supply chain there are policies and testing programs in place. The second major update made was within the draft standard release last year, there were a number of nominated roles responsible to implement a specific requirement. There were a number of comments saying this obviously can vary depending on the organisation. Yeah, we've removed those nominated roles responsible for those requirements, and the organisations implementing that standard will obviously be responsible for nominating those particular roles. That's no longer in the standard. In addition to that, further clarification was provided in regards to which heavy vehicle activities are considered within scope of the CLOCS standard. So within the final draft that'll be issued, you'll see that a definition has been provided termed frequent heavy vehicle movements, and that's basically a definition that the CLOCS steering group has endorsed, which covers which heavy vehicle movements will be considered within the scope of having to comply to the CLOCS standard. This is based on the regular construction freight movements that happen on construction projects, as well as a frequency of vehicle movements to a construction site. That whilst that definition is there is also a clause that states this is ultimately up to the principal contractor in consultation with their supply chain to determine what that is, taking a risk-based approach. So we obviously understand that infrastructure projects are scalable. We'll have small inner city developments compared to major sort of tunneling projects. And at the end of the day, they will need to make that determination within their own documents. And for the purposes of auditing compliance against the standard, which I'll get to shortly, that is what will be looked at the end of the day. In addition to that, there were inclusions to references to the use of using a safe system assessment or road safety audit as an acceptable risk assessment tool to assess the safety risks along haulage routes. Previously, there was only a reference to the HIRA human impact risk assessment tool. However, obviously there are other tools that exist out there that can provide the same assessment. So we don't want to limit that to just one acceptable methodology. And lastly, the other major change that was made to the contents within the standard was there were reporting requirements for reporting CLOCS data, such as number of vehicle movements on the project, number of transport-related incidents. That was previously monthly, quarterly, and annually performance reporting. That's been amended to just quarterly and annually. Obviously, this takes a lot of that administrative burden of, obviously the implementers of the standard, not having to, there might not be a lot of change between 2 months, but within a quarter, there'll be substantial data there that can show trends and changes. Yeah, so there were no changes made to the core requirements of the CLOCS standard. So I'll just go through what those are as a bit of a recap for everyone on the call. So next following slides, Jerome. So the core requirements of the standard remain as is. These were the heavy vehicle safety standards for bronze, silver, gold level requirements for CLOCS accredited vehicles. I'm not going to read through the list of safety technologies, but as you can see there, these haven't changed from last year. Next slide, thanks, Jerome. Sorry, Jerome, you're on mute.
Just for a clarification as well, Michael, on the bug flexors, air intakes, those are just been clear on not haves as well, just so people aren't confused into what's there as well.
Yeah, correct. And that's in the standard. So it's clearly defined in that bronze table there. There are a number of accessories to vehicles which impede driver field of view, and they are listed as not required or should not be on the vehicle.
Not be on the vehicle.
Yeah, correct. Next slide, thanks. Same thing. The driver safety standards have not changed since last year, so the requirements still remain as is under the licensing requirement, verification of licenses, training and competency minimum requirements, fitness for duty minimum requirements, and safe behaviour and culture programs. And as you can see, the bronze, silver, and gold requirements are listed there. Next slide, thanks, Jerome. And the logistics and planning standards. So this is a summary of those logistics and planning standards in the CLOCS A standard itself. They remain the same. So the requirement for undertaking a risk assessment of the project, haulage route risk assessments. As I mentioned before, there are a number of methodologies that can be used to undertake that. In addition to that, and I'm not sure, Jerome, if you'll be talking to this later on, but there were a few questions about how construction projects would go about risk assessing their project as opposed to just the haulage route risk assessment. And we have, thanks to Merv Rollins for his work on this, we have developed a risk assessment tool that can support organisations to determine their level of risk that their construction project has. And that takes into account a number of factors. I'm not sure if we have a detailed presentation on that, but
I have it coming up, Michael.
Brilliant. Sorry, I haven't seen the whole slide deck yet. But yeah, so that was one of the, it was a number of comments on that one. So that's basically a tool that exists now that can be used by organizations. Again, there might be better tools out there or more sophisticated risk assessment methodologies. So that's doesn't limit you to using just that tool. In addition to this, major requirements being and consistent with the CLOCS UK standard is the provision of the construction logistics management plan, which forecasts the vehicle movements for the project and the planned measures that will be taken by that construction project during the construction phase to minimise and mitigate their impacts and risks associated with the cumulative freight task. So the planned measures is the key item in here, and there is a whole table in an appendix of the CLOCS A standard which lists examples of what those measures can be. So that's basically remains the same. And then the last, again, of the core requirements, the communication. Oh, sorry, next slide. Yeah. The communication and engagement standards all remain the same as well. So the provision of case studies, applying the CLOCS A logo and signage to the project or vehicles if required, participating in community engagement campaigns with the local community, as well as monitoring of community complaints. So those all remain the same. Next slide, thanks, Jerome. So our next steps, I think I mentioned this at the start. So we will have a final draft, which will be circulated to the CLOCS A community after this workshop. And there obviously is opportunity for any remaining comment and feedback. This is primarily comments and feedback which are game changers or non-negotiables that will be considered. For minor sort of issues, they'll be considered, but we really only want comments that are sort of deal breakers or major things that might have been missed in this version. And then a final review will be undertaken by the consolidation group with endorsement by the steering group in June 2023 prior to its publication, which we're aiming for in July. Next slide, thanks, John. Cool, and that's basically where we're at now with the standard. So happy to take any questions. Looks like no questions, Jerome.
No. Great job, and I was going to say, sing out Michael's praise for doing that. I think he did a spectacular job in consolidating, pulling it all together, and thank you to all the technical groups for working through it all as well. And thank you to everyone who provided feedback. That's helped take it to the next sort of level. and good and bad as well. So we had people putting things out, and we've had very constructive conversations and moving all these elements forward. So it is always hard to meet everyone's expectations. I think the stand where it lands at the moment certainly does that. So great job, everyone. If there's no other comments or questions, we'll move on. No? Excellent. And what we'll do also, just with that standard, is we'll just get it laid out and hopefully get that circulated out to the CLOCS community towards the end of next week. Now that we've got this sort of stage finalising, we're just waiting for this step. So next, so you're going to hear Michael again now as he dives on in and touches on the auditing and accreditation components of it, which is still a bit of a work in progress. Over to you, Michael.
Rightio. So obviously that previous section was about the standard itself. That's basically with the standard, there will be a need to verify compliance to the standard. So, and this is a main deliverable of our project funding from the NHVR2 to provide an auditing framework for how it'll be able to be independently verified that implementers of the standard actually comply. So, might go to the next slide. Thanks, Jerome. Rightio. So, basically, CLOCS is taking an audit and accreditation approach. And with the aim of accreditation, basically demonstrating that the organisation has met all the necessary requirements to comply with the CLOCS standard. So this will look similar to existing accreditation schemes out there that you would be familiar with already to date, such as your TruckSafe or your NHVAS accreditation schemes. However, as a lot of you will know, the scope of the CLOCS standard is a lot different to the TruckSafe and NHVAS, and obviously has a construction focus. So organisations that are seeking to become accredited to the CLOCS standard will essentially have to pass an audit, and those audits include an entry audit or re-accreditation audit and self-assessment. I'll just take questions at the end if that's all right. Happy for you to put your hand up as well. That's fine. I'll just take questions at the end. So audit and basically to support this process, the CLOCS group have basically started developing an audit and accreditation business rules and standards document to outline those requirements and steps for an entity to gain accreditation to the CLOCS standard, as well as requirements for auditors to in terms of what they have to meet to conduct a CLOCS audit. So that is basically being laid out right now. There's been a number of workshops and meetings with external providers, as well as a number of comments as well that we've been working through from the NHVR2 from their accreditation arm. So as I mentioned before, this is a key deliverable of the NHVR project, as well as that the auditing and robustness of the auditing program is a governing principle of our MOU that we've signed with CLOCS UK too. So there is a need for us to have a process that is independent and has the ability to conduct those checks and isn't something that I guess has holes in it. So we need to be able to demonstrate that we have quite a thorough auditing process. So next slide, thanks, Jerome. So with that, as I mentioned, we have developed an audit and accreditation business rules and standard. This document is currently in its final stages, and basically sets out ranging from the first steps of becoming a member to CLOCS. So becoming a member to the CLOCS program will actually be open to anyone, any organisation, whether they work in construction as a principal contractor or as a transport organisation or as a client or government department, or just a general interest group or individual. So any person can become a member to CLOCS. However, if the organisation wants to demonstrate that they meet the CLOCS standard within their business and their operations, they will need to apply for accreditation. So the accreditation rules and standards sets out the process for that. It talks about the accreditation period, how long that will last for, any fees and charges associated with audits, what the audits involve. So we are taking a self-assessment and audit combination approach. This is to align with the approach with CLOCS UK, but as well to conduct an audit, so an independent audit as well, just to do that verification. Obviously, there's a lot of things that need to be independently verified here, particularly regarding vehicle compliance, as well as checking implementation of actual management system and procedures, etc. The standard lays out the timing for these audits, as well as other different audits that may be conducted as well, such as random or triggered audits. The requirements around identification of vehicles and sites. I'll talk through that in the next couple of slides. Maintaining accreditation, how to progress to a higher accreditation level. There is a bronze, silver, gold element to CLOCS A. Downgrading, if the organisation wishes to downgrade. Termination and suspension, show cause appeals process, exiting the program, and then requirements for auditors as well. And then, yeah, that's pretty much the outline of this document. This will also be shared with those that are interested in it. This is not going to be, I'd say, it's not going to be shared in its draft form right now, but when we get to a final draft, that'll be shared, and people are welcome to comment on this as well. So just go to the next slide. Thanks, Jerome. So speaking of the audits, this probably gives a bit more of a visual representation of what will be required. So organisations wishing to be accredited to CLOCS A will have to complete an initial entry accreditation audit, and this will need to be completed and passed within the first 3 months of applying for that accreditation. Again, just want to preface this by saying that the CLOCS A program will be taken over by a host managing body from July 2023 onwards. So some of these details may change a little bit depending on any consultation or any further decisions made, but this is the main framework at this stage. Then as part of the accreditation, maintaining the accreditation, a CLOCS A self-assessment will be required within 12 months following the initial accreditation audit being passed. And then every other year, a re-accreditation audit will be required. So it's a biennial process. So 1 year it's a self-assessment, the following year it's a re-accreditation audit. And this is to basically take that. We understand, obviously, organizations have a lot of audits going on. I seem to live audits every day of my life. So we don't want to just throw another audit on top of, an already hefty audit program that you may have already. And we do want to look at ways to be able to streamline this with any other accreditation audits that may be conducted, particularly for the transport operators that obviously would be participating in NHVAS and truck safe schemes already. There are other audits as well, which may be initiated by the CLOCS A managing body. This is outlined in the standard and talks about if there are repeated non-conformances or any sort of repeated community complaints or customer complaints, there may be some triggered audits that are initiated. So that's basically lays that out. I think the next slide goes into might go to the next slide. Thanks, Jerome. Yeah, so some of you might remember this from the previous workshop. This shows the process and the loop that organizations will basically stay within that green box when they're maintaining accreditation. But there's obviously other other circumstances or things that may happen in that I guess that life cycle, depending on if the organization chooses to stay within the scheme or not. But yeah, this will all be within that final draft as well. So next slide. Thanks, Jerome. So I mentioned progression to higher levels. So the initial accreditation is typically bronze. However, organizations may also choose to demonstrate that they meet the silver and gold level requirements of the CLOCS A standard. So importantly, having a look within the CLOCS A standard, which of those requirements or specifications are required for silver and gold. That obviously requires a higher level of vehicle safety technologies, additional training and competencies, as well as other programs that need to be rolled out by the organization. And for principal contractors, that requires actually implementing measures and getting measurable data on the performance improvement of logistics planning measures. So important just to have a look at what those are if you are looking to go for this accreditation in the future and to see where you do this in your business. So progression to silver and gold accreditation will only be achieved by the organisation providing the required minimum level of evidence to demonstrate that they comply with that requirement. So as such, organisations can't achieve silver level accreditation unless it can be demonstrated that the silver requirements in the CLOCS A standard have been met. So that obviously makes sense. Where we get a little bit more complex is there might be a mixed level of compliance, particularly for fleets and construction entities that have a number of different sites that might be operating at different standards. So if an organisation, for example, using the fleet probably is the easiest example now, and I say that lightly, if an organisation has a mixed fleet of bronze, silver, and gold level vehicles, which they nominate for CLOCS A accreditation, they will only be granted, the organisation itself will only be granted their overarching accreditation based on the level of which the majority of vehicles comply with. So they may obviously have vehicles that only meet the bronze requirements, and may invest in a number of newer vehicles and change their sort of their fleet procurement requirements to meet the gold level standard. Those vehicles will obviously meet the respective standard, but the organisation will be given the overarching accreditation based on that majority. Next slide, thanks, Joe. So yeah, this slide, as I mentioned before, there will be a requirement to, as part of the comms and engagement requirement, to display on CLOCS A accredited vehicles that are nominated for CLOCS A accreditation to be fitted with a label demonstrating the CLOCS A standard that it complies with, so that being either bronze, silver, or gold. Identification labels will be issued after those audits once the accreditation is received, and only issued to nominated vehicles. So an ID number will be issued to that vehicle. Sites will also need to display that they're a CLOCS accredited site, should they be nominated and participating in the scheme. And the accreditation logo will similarly need to be displayed at the entry to that nominated site following receiving accreditation. Identification logos are only issued to nominated sites and must not be displayed on sites that are not accredited. Right, so this is the last bit. So just working through this is sort of the remaining piece of work that we're still working a fair bit on, just regarding our requirements for auditors who will be conducting these audits. So we want to make this, as I mentioned before, as streamlined as possible with existing accreditation schemes. So the main, I guess, requirements for auditors that are going to be certified as a certified CLOCS A auditor is that they'll have to comply with an auditor code of conduct, which will be developed. Again, this will be taken from pretty much existing schemes, such as the NHVAS and BOAS schemes in New South Wales. Certification will have to be achieved. We're having discussions with certification bodies currently about setting that one up, and again, making sure that it does align with existing schemes. We don't want to create unnecessary administrative work. So this certification will rely on a number of obviously prerequisites and qualifications, and competence and experience. That includes obviously alignment to existing accreditation schemes, but also taking into account relevant industry experience too. There will be a requirement for an auditor exam, as all certifications do require this. In addition to that, a work style assessment, and then a recertification requirement too. CLOCS A auditors will be allocated by the CLOCS A host and managing body. This is to maintain that independence. So that's it. Next slide, thanks, Jerome. So yeah, next steps on this, as I mentioned before, we also have a final draft of this standard. We need to basically work through the auditor requirements at this stage, and then put that forward to the steering group and hand that over to the CLOCS A host. Auditor certification program will be established by a recognised certification body to manage. So this will be managed outside of the CLOCS A host, but the CLOCS A host will basically oversee certified auditors and allocate those auditors. As I said, interested parties are welcome to comment on the business rules and standards, and they can do so by getting in touch. As I mentioned before, that'll be sent out when that final draft is ready. So it'll likely go out after the standard is released. I think that's it. Any questions on that one?
Yep, Michael, it's Merv Rowlands here, if you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
Is there only going to be one type of auditor, or are you going to have, are they going to be, you know, a specific vehicle auditor versus a, you know, logistics or planning auditors, or are we just, they're all going to be one and they'll have to know everything? Yeah, that's a good question, Merv. So we've obviously had this discussion already, and we've been working through this. There will be, in our discussions with one of the certification bodies that we are looking at approaching, not confirmed yet, there is going to be a minimum CLOCS A auditor certification included above the base CLOCS A auditor certification, which will include the construction and construction principal contractor scope of the audit. So the base is basically the transport and logistics component, and then in addition to that, the auditors can do the additional module, which will include an assessment and an induction to the CLOCS A standard. So that will basically be an additional module that they can, I guess, include as part of their certification. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Merv. Any other questions? Comments? I've been learning a lot about auditing myself on this journey, which I was totally unaware of. So it's been fascinating. Once again, thank you, Michael and the others who have been leading this and pulling it together as we're going through. So great job again. Any other comments from people? I'm happy to move on.
All pretty straightforward.
Kim?
Oh, spoke too soon.
You're on mute, by the way, Kim. You're still on.
Can't hear you.
Sort of, your mic seems to have been gone. You're not on mute anymore. You might want to. You might have to type it into the chat. Thanks, Kim. You've lost your mic today. You can yell as loud as you want.
Sorry, mate. Can't hear you.
So Kim, just give me a nod. Are you typing into the chat? Okay. Hopefully it's not a big question. So take that as you may need to get a few auditors on board per big advertising. Yeah. Thanks, Kim. We'll take that as a note.
Right.
And some wisdom, and we can follow up with you afterwards as well. That's great. Move on to the next sort of section now, unless there's anyone else. Once the program is embedded in the new organisation after July, how are costs associated with running the program going to be met? Excellent question. I'll fold that into the next section, Rachel, when we talk around governance. And because there's a membership fee structure that'll be going in, but I'll touch that into the governance and the expressions of interest component as well. So I'm going to be talking to now the supporting tools, and there's been a vast array of these that have been developed because the goal is to make it as easy as possible for the new host organisation, have all the solid foundations to go about doing it. So there's been a lot of elements feeding into it. What I'm going to touch on is really looking at these sort of core areas around the branding, case studies, and there's also been some fantastic collaboration. And I got Rachel sort of put that up there. I've got to acknowledge Rachel for her fantastic work, the Victorian Department of Transport and Planning around the toolbox talks that they're developing. There's a tier assessment tool and heavy vehicle inspection manual underway, and those other sort of elements as well, which I'll touch on as we go through. So just to let everyone know, what we're doing is part of it with TG4. We've been creating an entire pack. This is just sort of 3. The aim is to have a range of materials that can be used as engagement material for the community. So you can have common messaging similar to CLOCS in the UK. So when people see it, it's getting the same message that's based around education, drawing on the sector to make it as pointed as possible. So there's another 4 on top of these as examples, which we're just going through and refining at the moment. And then there's just a general one, which we posted up, and you would have seen a picture earlier where Michael had it sitting on as part of the branding at entrance sites and those sort of components as well. So the goal is all these materials will be made freely available to CLOCS A members as it sort of moves forward and be downloadable. So as showed earlier, you saw Michael's references and showing the branding template. So this is close to the final versions here on the left, which goes on the vehicles, which shows the year and the ID number. Similar to the Safe Load program, once they sort of go out and they're basically renewed every sort of year to show sort of currency going in there. Within the documents as well, so within the program, there's going to be complete packs pointing to the heavy vehicle safety technology, drawing on basically all elements in there to make life as easy as possible. So there's ones around driver training, and then there's also ones around logistics and planning that feed in there as well. And then there'll be a pack that goes in that shows the entire breakdown by tiers. So what we've tried to do is make life as easy for implementation as possible for people on the sites going through and checking it, and also for industry to make sure they're meeting all the standard requirements for the vehicles as they move through. In addition to it, we have 10 case studies which are going through and being developed. These are sort of 2 to 3 pages. As an example, you can see the Ether Group one here that's been finalised, talking about site underrun protection. And there's sort of a general structure that's actually built into the standard as well, that organisations within the program will generate case studies. Obviously, these are the finalised version where they've been made all pretty, but each one of these will be going up on the website. The requirement will be that they have to be done based in a Word document with a number of images, and they'll be closed out and made to look like this. So I just want to acknowledge Olivia Dobson for her amazing work in helping pull these together, and once again Rachel Carlisle for assisting in providing a number from Victoria as well, which can show the sort of the collaborative approach in how we've gone through. But once again, the aim of these is to actually show different elements of the standard being applied, so organisations can draw on it and highlight and understand, I guess, the different sort of components, implementation questions, costs, elements, how it's been applied to make life as easy as possible for organisations to draw on. And these will always be expanded and growing over time within the library of the CLOCS A website. Here's just a bit of a snip of the toolbox talks that's being developed at the moment. So you can see here the first one, the blind spots. This went through TG4 just the other day to have a review. And you can sort of see there's 3 sort of core organisations which have been featuring with their truck drivers, which will be going in there. So these are sort of based on the NSP Heavy Vehicle Toolbox Talk methodology. Key thing is creating an entire pack that is drawn together featuring truck drivers, talking to truck drivers around the issue. And one of the beauty bits that's come out of it, which Rachel sort of pointed out the other day, is they're seeing packs they can actually develop for the community as well, to make it sort of quite easy. But what you can do is, this is a 3-minute video, and there's all supporting facilitation packs and everything that go with it, so organisations can go from it. And the goal will be then sort of drawing this into a baseline bronze standard as well, which can sort of replicate. They'll be closed behind the program to make sure all the organisations go through and they've conducted this, so the sort of drivers understand the VRU interactions. And the goal, these Pro 3, there might be another 2 that get developed as well. One around urban driving would be the other one, and one's Just Vision with regards to the heavy vehicles interactions with other road users, and just understanding those sort of vagaries as well. As mentioned earlier, Michael touched on this, is the tier assessment tool, which Merv has gone through one of his deliverables in developing. What we have is there's a number of measurables which flow through. The primary goal of the tier assessment tool was to understand the principles and the relevant variables that exist between infrastructure projects, to quantify them and ascribe a rating system to each, so that they can be scored and aggregated with an average score to an overall area. So the key sort of areas looking at the total project cost, the resident population, and the average daily heavy vehicle deliveries, and the distance from the project site to an arterial highway. And so from that, they can look at, I guess, the number of approved routes, traffic density, intersections within that sort of last 5 kilometres as well. So from that, they can then go through and draw together understanding what the rating would look like, and to where it sort of lands with regards to a risk-based approach. And then they know what tier the project will go through. And that's obviously sort of confirmed through the auditing as it moves through, and will be checked off in those sort of first stage. But this will provide a sort of a clear direction to the infrastructure, sorry, to the construction projects as to what they're looking at for their standard. The other part that's being developed at the moment is a heavy vehicle inspection guide. The intent of this document is to really quantify, as far as reasonably practical, what is required or accepted, and also what is not accepted. So it's going to be very clear in the pass-fail criteria. This may not always be completely possible, but the intent is to be very particular to the standard, and it's got to be made nice and clear, and so that the inspector will be required to make judgment calls on what's reasonable in some circumstances and what's unreasonable as well. So that will then provide very clear. And once again, all these materials will be easily available on the CLOCS website. The other part, this just shows, I guess, a high level of all the different templates and components going on. Some of you may or may not be aware of the truck ride along, which NRSUP and CLOCS has been developing in conjunction with Wholesome, and sort of guided through from TG4. So what this is really assisting that seeing through the eyes of a truck driver. So instead of just sitting in the seat of a truck, the goal is to leave one of the Wholesome quarries and go through an urban delivery process and actually see how different people interact. It's not designed for everyone. The aim is for policy influencers, those sort of people, leaders, politicians, even within organisations, them allocating. So Transurban, for example, and even driver trainers. So we're talking with a number of the driver training, so they can send some of the trainers out to actually understand what's like in those sort of vehicles as well. It's been ticked off for ethics approval between Monash University and Swinburne universities. So what that means is we can also help evaluate and improve. So we measure before and after the person's attitude before they get in the vehicle, and then touch base with them 6 months afterwards to see how it's going. So that's really around that angle of sharing the responsibility to get other sort of champions from outside to understand the process. So thank you to everyone involved in that one. As you can see, there's a large number of operational templates which they'll be going through and utilise for the program. Probably just some of the key ones in there is looking at incident reports and safety alerts ticking through, and sort of feeding them back through to membership. A lot of this will all be digitised as well, which we conducted through the website. We have a CLOCS guidance report, which sits on the side, which really summarises everything and the journey that we've been going on in developing it. And the last part we're sort of pulling together at the moment is to really how to conduct sort of good practice approach with community engagement. So as mentioned, you've got the posters, consultation, areas like that. So how do we go through when these sort of projects are going on? And that can be used as some guidance for organisations before they commence their, before they commence any of the major construction, so the community is aware, and then how they can be engaged through that sort of journey as well. The last start is the website's going through a major overhaul. It's in its beta format at the moment. This is sort of an insight into what it's looking like at the moment. There'll be a very clear closed members section behind it, where all the organisations can go in. They can see all the registered vehicles, driver training standards, and there will sort of be nuance between three core areas. One will be construction site related organisations. Another side will be transport related with heavy vehicles and drivers. And the third one will be others. So those who may not necessarily be within the CLOCS sort of projects per se, they might be ones that are more supporting organisations that are sit off to the side, that sort of might sit over everything. Perfect example could be some of the government entities as an example, where they don't have the actual standards or the transport, but they sit over and support in a different sort of way. So the idea, once again, is to make this as easy and user-friendly as possible. And you can sort of see all the components sitting there as we sort of move through, and will be captured as we sort of go along with the project. And it'll be then handed over to the next organisation as the host to take it all forward once we've got it all set up. So I know you just heard from me rapidly moving through it all. Any sort of questions on any of the communications that we just shared? Or tools, I should say. Anything we might have been missing as an example? No? Excellent. All right, well, now we'll answer your question next, coming up, Rachel, and over to you, Drew.
Hi, can you hear me? I didn't test my mic before I came on, Jerome.
Good to go, mate.
Good? Right, beauty. Okay, I was asked to work with the steering group to develop a terms of reference and a government procedure structure. So this works in parallel with the standard. So this is about how CLOCS is actually going to migrate to a continuing organisation from now. So next slide. Okay, so we're working with in parallel and working out the governance procedures in terms of reference. So this is all my slides here. I've only got 2 or 3 slides. This is about explaining how that transition period will take place. We've been looking at a couple of ways to do that. So we will commence with being housed in a host organisation, but longer term there'll be 2 options to be considered, and that will be continuing with the host organisation arrangement or moving to a standalone not-for-profit organisation. So I've got a couple of slides to explain that. Next slide. Okay, so if you look at this slide, we've got several phases here. So the 10 phases is on the assumption that it moves through to a not-for-profit standalone organisation. You'll notice at phase 7, we have a check and see if we need to move longer term and keep the host organisation. So if we just work through that, we've got finalised CLOCS standard, talking about today. We're identifying host organisation. That work is currently being done. An executive officer, which I'm calling it, but it's basically the person that will be central to running of CLOCS, needs to be engaged. The development of the membership base will continue. And then if we need to have an advisory council, and we've set up how that advisory council will look, and there'll be representatives from all of the key areas in the transport and the construction industry. And out of that, we'll appoint an independent chair. The advisory council is then established. And then at that point, we will know how that host organisation arrangement is going in the advisory board. So at that point, the decision will be made, do we continue as business as usual and keep growing and developing the organisation under that governance arrangement of the host organisation and advisory board. If not, we progress into the phase 7, where we develop the NFP organisation structure, establish a board and governance arrangements, appoint board chair. We believe that person can be the same as the advisory council, and transfer operations from host organisation to the board. So the next slide explains that a bit more in terms of an organisational structure. So on the left, we've got the interim plan up to that stage 7. So we establish the advisory council, the executive officer is engaged, host organisation is identified. So down the bottom, you've got membership, revenue and audit. That just feeds into the host organisation and across the executive, and then up to the advisory council. We've got a consolidation subcommittee at that point, and we've got champions and supporting partners, and they work in with the executive. And that could possibly be long-term, as I've just described, except for the consolidation subcommittee won't be there. So that's one model. At that stage 7 on the right, we've got the structure under the not-for-profit model. So if you see there, we've got finances, revenue and audit, membership working from the bottom up, membership champion supporting, marketing, that all goes into the executive officer role. He then reports to the advisory council and to the board, and the advisory council reports to the board. So the board will really be purely a governance board, and it will take its advice from the advisory council. We went black. Oh, there we go. And then we go to the advisory council. So that's the thinking at the moment. We believe if we go for the not-for-profit model at stage 7, we continue that. There's a bit of work to be done in that process. Things like the executive officer will also then need to take over the membership revenue and all of the finances. So that becomes a treasurer role as well. And that executive officer will probably need an executive assistant to assist with that. But those decisions will be made at that hold point around stage 6. So that's the thinking at the moment. We've tried to keep it as simple and as transparent as possible, but be robust in the sense that it will meet all the needs and goals of CLOCS A. That's it, I think, Jerome. I don't think we have another slide after that.
No, now it's been once more onto the development phase, and I'll answer Rachel's question that, and just give some real clarity on this. Like CLOCS in the UK is delivered exactly like the item on the long term on the left, through an advisory council on the long term sort of approach, as is the Safe Load program and a number of them. So what we've sort of done is really to future-proofing opportunity and just sort of offering those sort of alternatives if required. But if it always sits on the first option, that works perfectly fine as well, and it'll come down to the advisory group moving forward, and that's sort of a good incentive for the host organisation to really make sure they're aligning with the needs of the CLOCS A members and long term with the program as well.
Jerome, I just want to add to that. Yeah, in the UK CLOCS, that advisory council has like a rotating chair. I think it's every 2 years or something, and organisations are put forward to sit on that, and they always have to be, a constructor, a transport operator, a client, etc. So, and a vulnerable road user group as well. So that's a good model, obviously, because it has that rotating chair.
It keeps it grounded, making sure it's really working at the coalface. So any questions at all for Drew for everyone before I just move on to the expression of interest component? Anyone would like to raise or throw at Drew? No? Great. So just looking at the expression of interest, proposing sort of going at the moment. So CLOCS A will be a membership-based model. The membership tiers and fees are vary depending upon, I guess, total turnover of the organisation. So the goal being, if you're like a 1-2 small operator, the cost is quite small and low. And if you're doing a small construction project, that would fall under the remit of CLOCS A, and you've applied for membership, same thing. So the CLOCS, and that's basically laid out very clearly, and we shared that in the last sort of meeting, what those fee structures going to be. So to Rachel's question moving forward as well, thus far we have $250,000 in seed funding from 4 different entities coming through, which gives us basically New South Wales, Queensland and Victorian government entities supplying some seed funding for the first year. And then there's a request into the Commonwealth to provide some seed funding. And the goal of the seed funding is really just to get the program up and going with the new host before the membership fees begin sliding in as well. So there's not like a scamper to get the charges and do things as fast as possible. So that gives us a bit of breathing room to begin going through. So we had 3 applications become the host of the program, and we had a prioritisation session of those applications just on Monday. We've gone through and now we're commencing the discussions with the preferred organisation, which will then lead into, I guess, the due diligence. And once that's sort of completed and it ticks the box that they're happy with us and we're happy with them, we'll then announce it, and the goal will be for that to take place by the 29th of May, which is basically, once we've gone through our process, we then have to pass it on to NHVR and the Commonwealth as part of our process, that they're sort of happy as well as how it's going, and then we'll begin sort of the process of handing everything over that we've been busily developing, a bit more of an implementation plan as it moves forward. But I think we had 3 absolutely fantastic applications that have gone for it, and it's sort of very close. And the next sort of discussion will move in as to which one is actually finally successful moving forward with it. So also the auditing fees have been set and they're fixed as well, which we're going through, and there'll be probably a number of others that will begin developing for training and other sort of elements, which will be optionals to help provide revenue for the program as it moves forward. But all these we're trying to set up as much as possible, which goes back to Drew's point earlier. The goal is not to have it set up as a cash cow or a big revenue raiser. The aim is to basically look after, I guess, harmonise across the industry, improve safety and efficiency along those sort of components. And that's really the underpinning of making sure why we've got that lever earlier that Drew pointed out as part of the governance structure. Any questions at all on the expressions of interest? Rachel, are you happy? Does that answer your question as well? And does anyone else have any further questions? Sorry, Rachel.
Yeah, I just was going to add, are the audits costs going to be scaled according to the size of organisation that needs to be audited, so that it's actually achievable for small players, of which there are many in the construction sector?
Good question, Michael.
That is a good question. The fees haven't been set in stone, and we'll obviously, rely on a lot of things depending on, which organisations are engaged to conduct the audits, as well as the time, that the audit takes, etc. That is the goal, to make it scalable. Membership fees most definitely will be scalable. Audit fees, we want to see if that can be done as well. But the CLOCS managing body and host will be setting a cap so that auditors and organisations can't exceed what's considered a reasonable cost for an audit. So,
thanks, Rachel. No questions there. Powered through a lot there. So now it's sort of moving into the acknowledgement sort of section. I just want to acknowledge, really, I guess this is the diversity. Actually, Chris Luce is actually retired now. So Chris, you've been a fantastic supporter from the very beginning, and you're still sitting in as a retiree, giving your time, which is fantastic. But all these sort of people and organisations have all played a crucial role in taking it all forward. And obviously, once again, without NHVR and the Heavy Safety Initiative supported by the federal government would not have been possible. But the in-kind support has been astronomical for this sort of project, from a number of state governments and industry all throughout, local governments. So, and I think just touching on this next sort of one, this is the steering group that's sort of come through towards the end in taking it forward. And Transport for London with Sydney, with the CLOCS program in the UK, has been a fantastic supporter and enabler as well. And they continue, we'll be catching up again soon once the standard's sort of finalised. And we're also now a strategic partner of CLOCS in the UK as well, which is all set up to move forward. These are the formalised supporters of the program, and in addition to them, like this is the supporters, but then there's so many others. For example, Boral, CCAA, EPH, Wholesome, Transurban, Walga, a number of local governments, Southern Shire councils, and all sorts of other sort of ones have come through as well. So there's a large number of people that have stepped up and helped us through this sort of journey. So thank you all very much. Just in other business, as we're sort of closing out, some of you may or may not be aware. Oh, I didn't realise that's popped over there. So as part of the Brisbane Truck Show, which is a bit of an output from our, oh, sorry, that looks rather, that should not be sitting there. There we go, that's better. So we're launching as part of the Brisbane Truck Show a humanising truck driver campaign, and this has sort of been output from the Heavy Vehicle Toolbox talks and the Suicide and Road Transport Prevention Project that was recently launched, and part of CLOCS A and coming through and contributing as we've been interviewing these truck drivers, part of our interviews. So the whole goal of this is to get people to see not the truck, but the person inside the truck. And understand they love their job, they're passionate about it, they're highly, highly professional and skilled in what they do. And for them to get home safely, they need everyone to be safe around them. So at the truck show, there'll be bumper stickers, there'll be flyers, fence banners, they'll be all around the site. And we're linking back into several videos of truck drivers where you hearing them and it's all about humanising them. I know Mark's was kind enough to introduce us to Ricky. From Wholesome, who's quite the rock star now, and I think he's going to gain a bit of lip from Wholesome when they begin popping up. And we'll also be developing a number of Lego busts, which will be set up around the site on the truck show, which will be linking in with their the life-size Mack truck that's getting built on site. So we've got to sing out the Heavy Vehicle Industry Association for their fantastic support in enabling this to go forward, and linking it going into the truck show. And these are the drivers that are featuring. So we have Simeon, Frank, Robert, Ricky, and Mira, showing a nice sort of diversity there as well. And I think they've done the sector proud. And so when it goes out, we'll be doing a bit of support package that will circulate through the members. Viva Energy's kindly provided a couple of $1,000s in fuel vouchers to support social media posts as well. So for those best posts, we'll be able to go through. But this is something that's going to be coming up, just to let you all know and be aware of it. And if there's a chance to support it, I recommend getting on board behind it all. So that's my other business. Is there anything else anyone else would like to share before we sort of close out? We've moved through a bit quicker than anticipated, but the next sort of steps in moving forward. As mentioned, the standard will be circulated to everyone and that should be done next week or two once we've finalised the layout of it. There'll be a final sort of review and then publication in July. The audit rules are the last part, just sort of getting pulled together at the moment. If you wish to be part of that, please nominate, and you can be involved in that as it's sort of going through and being sort of finalised at the moment. And those are the last sort of elements. And then we're developing the heavy vehicle driver inspection guide. And then there's another few pieces that are getting finalised along with those case studies as well. But it's really just those last parts of the project which we're closing out at the moment. So thank you all very much. I don't know, does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to share before we close off? No? All right. Piece of cake, everyone. Thank you all very much. More to come out, and we'll circulate that to the entire CLOCS A community in the coming sort of weeks, along with the humanising truck driver campaign. So we'll give you back 40 minutes of your day. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Jerome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Well done.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jerome and Michael. Thank you all.
Thank you.